I have something great for you today. On a weekly fellowship that I'm a part of, we had a guest speaker who is going to be the keynote speaker at our Kingdom Restoration Conference this year, coming up in July. Dr. Yonatan Baruch. He is a pathologist and medical doctor who has been a student of the Word basically his whole life. And he's got a lot of wisdom, very articulate, much better speaker than I am. And I'm going to share his teaching portion that he taught this past Sabbath. It is part one of a three-part series. I will post those others as he continues to teach this. And this is just a prelude to the type of teaching we're going to have at the Kingdom Restoration Conference this year. So please tune in, watch the whole presentation, and look for the follow-ups of the part 2 and part 3 that will be coming up shortly. And I really hope that you will enjoy Dr. Jan as much as I did in his teaching, and it is very valuable. And the teaching is also an academic paper that he has on academia.edu that I will share down in the description below, so that you can access that and see his completed work as well, that he has presented for peer review in the academic world. Here is the promo for the Kingdom Restoration Conference, followed by his teaching. Have a great day.
The most prophesied event in all of Scripture is the restoration of Kol Israel. And that restoration begins where it always has, in the home, under proper biblical headship and authority. The Kingdom Restoration Conference is back for its second year. Join us in Knoxville, Tennessee, July 9th through 12th as we gather to study Torah, explore headship and patriarchy, and learn how to build family, clan, and tribe the way Scripture intended. This year's speakers include Aubrey and Dr. Rujane Killian, Dr. Yonatan Baruch, Teacher Pete Rambo, Mike Allen of Digging in the Word, Ryan Ridgely, Jared Cheshire, and Deborah Augustine of Call for Wisdom, presenting and leading breakout sessions to guide you toward the restoration of Kol Israel. Seating is limited to just 200 participants, so don't wait. Register today at kingdomrestorationconf.com, and we look forward to seeing you there.
Before we dig in, I'm going to just ask the Most High to bless us in this discussion as we seek to try to change out our Western lens. It's from study, even in the world of medicine, when we think about medicine, like religion, with any book we read, as I was going through medical school and things of that nature, we tend to read the text through Western eyes. And what that means is that even if I don't try to, because I've been born and raised in a culture that is, Western based, that is Greco-Roman. Sorry about that. Greco-Roman in nature, that developed from the English, developed from Rome, and come to the West. There's a certain lens of on reality that I'm trained with, even before birth, that almost epigenetically kind of downloads into you. And so, part of the work of walking with Messiah and walking in Torah is to kind of remove that lens and to put in a collectivist lens, so that we can begin to think like ancient Hebrews. We can begin to look at reality and understand reality the way they understand reality. We grew up with NASA. We grew up with, the idea that the Earth is a globe, right? I'm neither here nor there with that one. I'm just throwing that out there. But we grew up with these certain presuppositions that we even come to anything we read with. We already have a background operating system when we come to any book, and that includes the Bible. So the goal here was to just begin to try and think from a collectivist mindset. Now, the work that I published on academia.edu, the 10 words as covenant privileges, was a work that started 30 years ago, there was a sermon that I preached at an all-night prayer vigil about 30 years ago, where some of the young adults in undergrad were called to come to one of my community church that I was at, and they asked several people to do these little sermonettes. And 30 years ago, I wanted to do something on the Ten Commandments. And as I was reading and studying for that and preparing for that, I came across the idea of inheritance. If you are separated with Christ, you are an inheritor with him. You inherit with him. You are an heir with him, as the scripture says. And so I begin to think of the Ten Commandments, and I had never heard of the concept of 10 commandments as 10 promises. I didn't know what Dabar meant. I didn't know what the idea of word itself, or the ontology, right? A word itself was different in the Hebrew. I only knew English at that time, and I wasn't a theology major. But when I wrote that sermon 30 years ago, it made sense to me that the 10 commandments, when the Spirit of the Most High dwelt in you, because the promise found in Ezekiel 36, the 10 commandments actually had to be promises, because once the Spirit got inside of you and started to do a work that you didn't control, it was something that looked more like a promise to me. And so when I preached the sermon, I preached it as 10 commandments as 10 promises. And that was 30 years ago. I kept that sermon for maybe 20 years in my old Bible. And eventually I probably lost it just about 10 years ago. But a few years back, as I was starting to write my first manuscript, I was looking for the article. I didn't have it. So I just started to write. And then my memory started to resurface about what I had written years ago. And this is the paper that developed from that. And now, within that 30-year time period, the Most High has added to my understanding and knowledge. And so I was able to expand that original concept, that I wrote as a young man in his 20s there. So, and so this is what we have here. So before we dig into this, I wanted to offer a word of prayer that the Most High might open our minds and our hearts, that we may hear him, and that we might hear what the Spirit would have to say to us at this time in Earth's history and in the history of redemption. Shall we pray? Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for all the many blessings that you have given us. I thank you for your loving kindness and your mercy, Father. I thank you for your Sabbath day, Father, and for the abundance of blessings that you bestow upon your people on the Sabbath day, especially, Father. I thank you for your forgiveness, Father. I thank you for your healing, Father. I thank you for your restoration, Father. I thank you for the blessing of your word, for Torah being written on the heart of those who believe, Father. I thank you for the death of Yahushua, Father, that he died and shed his blood, Father, that you sent your word became personified, your word walked amongst men, and your word bled and died for us here on this earth, because we know the blood drops hit the ground and the ground speaks out. And so, Father, I thank you for that. And as we ask for you to open our spirits, to open our minds today, Father, may you instill in us these words. May your Spirit, as we learn, write the Torah on our nefesh. In the name of YWHW Mashiach, and for his sake I pray, so let it be. And so as we start here, and you can see we have, we'll start off here with the 10 words as covenant privileges. So I wrote the paper, and as I wrote the paper, the article on Academia EDU is the pure article. And what we have here is all of my notes that are embedded when I was initially writing the paper. So I just added everything together for our discussion purposes for these 3 sessions. And so we're going to try to walk back in time. We're going to try and look through a collectivist lens, and we're going to try and deal with what words actually were in Hebrew society and community in ancient times. Okay, so let's start here. So 10 words is covenant privileges. Okay, this is the Elders edition here. So the couple concepts to know. And so what we're going to do with this expanded concept, the first thing here is Western colonial contrast. So we need to look at why is this important? Because in Western culture, we think of 10 commands as command you do, you don't. Is there a reason why it was translated as commands instead of words? Commands, totally different feel than words or utterances, right? And so that's going to tie into the ontology of what words were. Okay, and so that's going to be important as we look at this. So here's the Western colonial contrast. The inherited Western post-Reformation reading often treats the Decalogue as either a guilt checklist, an obsolete code, or a foil for grace. That inheritance that's given us that's an extension of Rome. Okay, that inheritance frequently traveled into colonial Christian teaching with anti-Jewish and supersessionist habits already embedded. So the terminology, we're going to deal with this terminology, the African-Semitic Dabar reconstruction. Okay, so this paper, this original paper, with this view in mind, and after each major section inserts a contrast box just to show you how the flow goes, showing how an African-Semitic Dabar reading reframes the same material as covenant speech, inheritance, transformation, and embodied fruit. Okay, and we'll use witnesses, a lot of witnesses here. So the boxes will also show, will also slow the discussion, pull out surface assumptions that we automatically have in Western culture, and compare scriptural claims with modern scholarly support. And these are some of the names here. So we'll go through those names as we read along. So the names of those scholars here, Bruce Wells, David T. Adamo, and others here, Isaac Oliver. Those are individuals who are Hebrew experts and who think more in a collectivist mindset. So they don't write like the common scholar in Western culture. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. But there's a lot of witnesses that really help us with this. And so session one, we'll go through what are the 10 words? These are questions to keep in mind as we're reading. Why does the colonial rules only reading shrink Torah? Okay. How does Deuteronomy 6, 28, 30 frame Torah as gift, access, and inheritance? Okay, so keep those in mind as we're reading. Session two, we'll get to session two next time, is how does transformation begin? We need to understand that. How do speech, confession, agreement, and healing function in a biblical and African-Semitic logic? So we need to understand how collectivist communities actually think about these things. And then session three, our last section here, does fulfill mean abolish? Right? Because that's the ongoing lore that we find in the Western church. Oh, it's abolished. It's done. He said fulfill, we're done. So we need to actually bite down into that and see if that actually is true, if it actually makes sense from an Eastern lens, right? And then what is fruit continuity? And then what does it mean to treat 10 words as promises written on the heart? Okay. So we have those teaching boxes here. So you'll see those pull up. So we'll get into the basic abstract, and we'll jump down into this. So just for the note, the paper emerges from a larger ongoing project of Covenant Dabar, Torah as privilege in African-Semitic household formation. So remember, Africa and the Levant are right next to each other. Matter of fact, the Levant is right on the African tectonic plate. These are all collectivist cultures. None of this is Greco-Roman. So we're going to dig into that. So this is why that in the literature, that framing African-Semitic, because it's joined. And some people will use Afro-Asiatic, right? This is all the Levantine area, okay? And it says, whereas the broader work focuses on men's health, covenant, household structures, and long-term communal stamina, this article concentrates specifically on salvation, inheritance, and the 10 words, Decalogue, as covenant privileges and promises. It is submitted here and will, for scholarly discourse, okay? So we'll get into the abstract now. So the paper argues that the Ten Commandments, the Aseret, haDibrot, are better understood as 10 utterances or 10 words of covenant privilege rather than merely prohibitive laws. Okay, that's the first thing. So hold on to that statement. Drawing on an African-Semitic conception of Dabar, right, of Dabar, word as legal act, right, kind of makes you think about binding and loosing a little bit. Deuteronomy 6, 28, and 30 are interpreted as a covenant operating system, right? And it that produces measurable outcomes for household stability, okay? And so we'll look at that, right? So household stability, generational continuity, and bodily health, right? So one thing to note when we get into this study is we're going to see that when the Messiah healed people, almost without fail, he used covenant clauses that you could be found in Torah when he made statements of healing. Okay, so he's going to court, pulling out, you know what? Legally, this is my client. It says here in the covenant, in the contract, A, B, C. Okay, so we're going to look at that and see how much he does it, right? And it gives us a pattern of how we should walk. Okay, and then we'll get into the study also integrates concepts of covenantal privilege, canonical texts, Second Temple and Qumran literature, Ethiopic healing traditions, African biblical hermeneutics, right, which are completely different than European or Western hermeneutics. Okay, and pastoral case material, very important here. Notably, Koch to propose that speech is functional, or speech functions as legal alignment with or against the covenant itself. The Decalogue is therefore reframed as an inheritance structure whose internalization is promised in Ezekiel 36 and Jeremiah 31 and fulfilled in spirit empowered obedience. And we're going to connect and support the Apostle Paul and his framing in Romans 8 and Galatians 5, right? Which sometimes those texts are that segment of Paul is sometimes used to actually undermine Torah. So we're going to actually do the reverse as we get down to the study. The paper also explores implications for transformation within African and diasporic communities. In particular, it treats health not as a random outcome. Okay, so as a physician, I see this all the time. People say, "Oh, well, my dad just had good health. I don't." That phrasing makes it look arbitrary. And so it wasn't really arbitrary like that in covenantal culture. And so we need to really deal with this because a lot of people think that they just have bad luck. All right, so we need to look at this. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe there's some issue with the mechanics of what they are speaking into their life. Okay, so we'll look at that. And in particular, it treats health not as random outcome, but as covenantal privilege right grounded in Torah. So we'll take a look at that, right? So these are the key words. You can go back and take a look at that. And so why do I use the terminology African-Semitic? So let's look at this. African-Semitic is used here for historical and interpretive accuracy, not for novelty. Biblical Israel belongs to the Afro-Asiatic hinge, joining Egypt/Africa, Sinai, and the Levant. So it is scriptural. Its scriptural world is better approached through a non-Western relational and speech-saturated ontology than through later Western dualism that really comes from a Greco-Roman milieu. So we look at the historical caution here. Palestine or Israel is ordinarily classified as Southwest Asia, the Levant, not simply North Africa. The stronger claim here is Africa-Asiatic land bridge, Afro-Asiatic interface, and Sinai's real African plate connection. Okay, so that's where that framing comes from. So you can hear that in the literature, and it's listed in the literature. So the first text we're going to look at here, and we'll kick it off this way: Isaiah 55:10 through 11. The word goes forth and accomplishes its purpose. And can I have someone read those two verses really quick?
Which verses do you want again, brother?
Isaiah 55, 10 through 11. I just want someone to read that really quick before we dig in a little bit deeper.
Isaiah 55, 10 through 11,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For as the rain cometh down, and the snow from heaven, and returneth not thither, but watereth the earth, and maketh it bring forth the bud, that it may give seed to the sower, and bread to the eater. So shall my word be that goes forth out of my mouth. It shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it.
Okay. So in Western culture, when I was going through undergrad and taking theology courses, and a lot of times when this was being read, it was just seen as poetry from Western eyes. Oh, it's like poetry. So because in Greco-Roman culture, the tendency is that words are descriptive. Words are not action-based. They're just describing things. But this is not so in a collectivist culture. In a Hebrew-based culture, words always have function. No word is neutral. Okay, so that's a principle you have to keep in, because we'll use that later. So academic witnesses, Gerald West, okay, South African biblical scholar and textual Bible study specialist on Africa, is the Bible's cradle and reception history. Okay, so that's one witness we'll use. And M.K. Salah and colleagues, right? Geophysicist and seismologist researcher on Sinai as a subplate of the African plate, right? And then we have Kazupa M.B. Nawamba and Jordan Bentiga, who is also a theologian and an ethicist, and he deals with dogmatics and Christian ethics scholar. He deals on the concept of vital force, and we'll get into that as relational, non-reductionist account of reality. And then Moses Al-Dili, Al-Duwu, researcher of African religion, cultural systems, and on the word as medium of vital force. So there's a concept that we'll dig into about this concept of vital force. Words in African culture, in ancient Hebrew culture, were not just descriptive, not neutral, not just sound. Words were things that actually continue to hang around even after you spoke them. Words had personification in those cultures. So words had a force to them that could not be discounted. Thus, in Hebraic culture, the issue of blessing and curses was a real thing. Like they attached themselves, the words, things that you said, attached to whoever you target them to. When the patriarchs in the Testament of the Patriarchs, the last will and testament of all the patriarchs, the sons of Jacob, were extremely important writing. Also, when you see Abraham give his last blessing and his testament, or you see Jacob performing a blessing on Manasseh or Ephraim, those were binding words. Those words stuck to the target, literally. This is how Hebrew culture thought in terms of the ontology of words. In Western thinking, we would be like, oh, he just said something. But no, this is not so. Those words followed you, okay? And they enacted or activated certain realities, okay? And this is how they thought about it. And then we'll get down here to the interpretive claim here. But before that, we'll get down to interpretive claims. In an African-Semitic frame, faith is not, we'll jump to faith now. Faith is not bare interior assent, but inward trust that becomes publicly operative through spoken confession and embodied obedience. Okay. All right. So keep that in mind. And then we'll go into Hebrews 11. We'll look at that and we'll deal with the concept of spoken seed. But the wider biblical and Second Temple frame supports a seed-like reading, which is uttered agreement, plants, aligns, and directs. So word actually has a functional purpose in reality, and seems to cut on the motor of the things that actually happen to you. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. That's not just poetry when you're looking at it from a Hebraic standpoint. Words are covenantal realities that actually affect change. Okay, what happened to when Jacob says to Laban, if somebody has those idols, I don't have that idol, and whoever has that, they're going to die. And then what happens years later? Right, Rachel passes away. Okay, so these are covenant realities. Okay, that is when you speak over your family, when you bless your family, you are doing something covenantally that is going to attach them. If you curse your family, you are doing something covenantally that is going to attach to them. So you have to be very careful about what you say over your children. Okay, so these are some of these concepts. And then just going down, we continue with the teaching notes really fast before we dig into the paper. And so for Hebrews 11, right, assurance of hope for realities. Hebrews 10:23, hold fast to the confession of hope. So the Apostle Paul continuously tells us these things. Romans 10:8-10, heart belief joined to the mouth. Same thing as in Torah. It is where's the word, right? It is nigh thee, in thy mouth. There's an order, and then in thy heart, right? And then so that you might do it, right? So there's a procedure here. So we'll look at that. Deuteronomy 30:14, we just mentioned that one. And then we'll deal with those academic witnesses again. And then we will continue on. So this first session is terminology, inheritance, covenant framing. That's what we're going to look at for this first session. And the aim of this is to redefine the 10 words within an African-Semitic covenant framework. Now that we know why we're using that, and show why Torah is best heard as gift, privilege, and speech ordered inheritance. Why should we look at it differently than just commands? You better do this, this, this. Is there a different way we're supposed to be looking at this? So in the forward we have here, this paper grows out of two overlapping stories. First, I am a physician and a pathologist by training, someone who spends his days asking very simple but stubborn questions. How did this happen? What is the process underneath what we see? The second is covenantal. As I viewed the scriptures through an African-Semitic lens, I realized that transformation in the biblical sense is never a vague spiritual feeling. In the mainstream church, do you feel like the Holy Ghost is on you? Do you feel like you're blessed? Oh, I feel good. So everything's feeling. So, is it really a vague feeling, or is there something more concrete that we can work off of? It has an engine, a structure, a pattern that can be traced and described. When reviewing ideas for the larger manuscript, the concept of biblical transformation came into view. I pondered and asked the question, well, how does change actually begin? Within this context, my own instinct was to reach for those same diagnostic questions. If we say that a man, a family, or a community has been transformed, well, what changed first? How can we track it, right? Where did this process start? What was the first covenant movement? The first spoken yes to the Most High. That set everything else in motion. Think about your own life, right? Do you remember the first covenant yes? Do you remember when you first said, you are Yahuwah Elohim, creator of heaven and earth, and I will take on your covenant? Do you remember? Because you said it first and it stuck. Okay, so this is what we want to pull out here. Okay, as a pathologist, I have to follow the chain of cause and effect down to the tissue level. As a student of Torah, I must follow the same chain down into the words, promises, and privileges that Yahuwah Elohim, right, has already spoken over his people. So there's certain things he's already spoken over those who take the covenant. Do they activate when you agree? Because we got to find this out. So the prophetic texts that frame The theme of transformation, right? These are what we're going to deal with. Ezekiel 36:26-27, Jeremiah 31:33, Romans 12:2, 2 Corinthians 3:18, Psalms 51:10, right? They all describe change in very concrete terms, no guesswork. A new heart is given. A new spirit is placed within. The law is written on the heart. The mind is renewed. None of this happens in a vacuum. People can see it. Well, what do they see? Okay, this is what we're going to deal with. It happens as the covenant Yahuwah speaks, as his words are received, and as those words are carried in the mouth, rehearsed in the body, and allowed to reorder desires and practice what you do. In other words, transformation is not simply trying harder. It is what happens when the word, the ruach, and the obedient human respond, and an obedient human response meet over time. So this part right here, I want you to keep this in mind. It is what happens when the word, the ruach, and an obedient human response meet over time. So this gives you the image of growth. Remember, this is agrarian culture. This is a culture of agriculture. And so everything is framed in the sense of growth. This is why a lot of his parables are dealing with farming growth, right? This is a growth cycle, right? Okay. What follows is an attempt to describe that process for one key area, the 10 Commandments, or more precisely, the 10 words. I argue that these are not merely rules to obey. Instead, they are covenant privileges and promises, spoken realities when internalized and voiced in agreement with Yahuwah. They generate measurable fruit in the life of a believer and in the household domain. This is not prosperity in the shallow sense. This is not prosperity, right? Word of faith. This isn't it. This is covenantal. Nor is it a rejection of grace. It is a return to a much older, deeply Hebraic conviction that Yahuwah changes or maybe grows what we love or grows us into those things and changes what we love and grows it. Not only what we do, but that his word, when near us and in our mouths, is the primary instrument of that change. Maybe Torah is seed that grows in the life. Okay, so we'll look at that. So we're going to read with attention to if transformation is real, where does it begin? These are some points to keep in mind. Central point: the paper starts with process, not sentiment. Change begins as divine speech is received, rehearsed, and embodied over time. Yahuwah said, and it was. Okay, this is some of the things that we'll look at. Okay, and so now we'll go on to the introduction here. From rules to royal decrees. In much of Western Christianity, the 10 Commandments occupy a specific mental drawer. They are treated as a moral checklist, as proof of universal guilt, or as a set of demands that Messiah has supposedly rendered obsolete. Now, in that framework, transformation is often reduced to a personal or individualistic effort, or said differently, trying harder to conform to external rules, hoping that feelings will eventually catch up. You have no power, no generative principle in you. By contrast, in the African-Semitic covenantal frame, 10 words are not primarily rules, but decrees spoken over your life. They function as the foundational speech act, right? Because in Hebrew culture, speech was an act by which the covenant Elohim, Yahuwah, defines the structure of life for his people. When the biblical text itself calls them 10 words rather than 10 commands, when you look at that word, it's actually 10 words or 10 utterances. It signals a different mental world. It's not Greco-Roman. In biblical Hebrew, a Dabar is not only a word, but a matter. It's something tangible. a case, an event. It has force, power to it. Speech is never neutral. This takes you back to the words of the Most High. Man will be judged by every idle word spoken. What does that mean? In a Greco-Roman sense, it's hard to kind of conceive that. But in a Hebrew world culture where word is thing, every word is important. Speech is never neutral. It is legal and generative. Thus, you understand now when I give you the power to bind and loose. That just doesn't happen out of anywhere. He doesn't just pull that out of anywhere. The very culture itself means words have the ability to either cause life and death. Okay, so with this in mind, we will seek to do three things. Okay, so keep these in mind. Reframe the 10 words as commandment privileges, generative speech that grows specific kinds of fruit, right? Okay, the parable of the seed, right, and the sower, right? So they grow things. Jeff Brenner, in one of his studies, Hebrew scholar, says that the ZC itself, and when you look at the Paleo Hebrew, really connects directly to fruit. So, in ancient Israel, when you look at the ZC, you're actually looking at what is a symbol of fruit, something hanging off of you, growing off of you. Okay. Number two, we'll situate this within the theme of transformation, and I will give you a new heart and a new spirit, new ruach, new breath. I will put within you as a creation event within the human heart. Demonstrate through biblical exegesis and cross-stream witnesses that salvation necessarily carries access to inheritance in a Semitic family, in a Semitic collectivist family sense. If we are children, then in fact we are heirs with Messiah. And inheritance includes not only future glory, but the present internalization of Torah and the practical outcomes that flow from covenantal proximity. If you're close, covenantal proximity, right? Well, we have a good example of that. When Moses spent that time with the Most High on Sinai, when he came down, because he was so close to covenant, he was in proximity to the Most High. When he walked away, he glowed and he was hard to look upon. So when you're in covenant proximity, changes happen, things happen. Okay. And now the argument is intentionally integrative. So we're going to integrate Torah, the prophets, Gospels, apostolic writings alongside Second Temple Jewish literature, Philo, Josephus, Qumran, along Ethiopic, African Jewish practices, along modern theologians and case study observers. The goal is not novelty, but recovery. We're going to recover to show that an uncolonized covenantal logic has always understood the 10 commandments or the 10 words as both obligation and privilege, both command and utterance. Okay, so we're going to look at that. And then let's jump down here to part two. And we need to look at the Western contrast here. I'm going to insert this here. The Decalogue is often preached as a guilt list. So remember this: proof of failure or an obsolete law code neutralized by Messiah. So this is exactly what happens, right? But we will attempt to do this. The 10 words is covenant decrees, right? Decrees. A king sits on high and decrees certain things, and it happens. That define the world Yahuwah creates for his people, right? He puts up boundaries. These are his boundaries on you, right? But the boundaries are not things you have to try and empower yourself to do. They are things that he will cause to happen in you, and you will begin to naturally want to do them. The issue is living inside that speech ordered world. Okay, so part two, let's get over to here, the 10 words and Semitic Dabar. Let's look at this. The starting point is terminological. In the Hebrew Bible, the Decalogue is not called 10 commandments, but 10 words. Okay, so we can look at that from Exodus 34:28, Deuteronomy 4:13, and 10:4. The noun Dabar ranges in meaning from word and speech to matter, right? Material, thing, or legal case. Standard lexicons note that the term can denote both spoken content, both the spoken content and the concrete event or situation that the speech concerns. So this is really important. So lexicons basically say this, that Dabar isn't just descriptive. It actually is the thing that it describes. Well, man, that's way outside of what we've been taught about what words are in the Western culture. In Hebraic culture and ancient Hebrew understanding and cosmology, words didn't just describe, they are. The Most High said, and it was. The thing he said didn't just describe the thing he said, but it also became the thing. It is the thing. Okay. So this is something to keep in your mind here. In other words, Dabar is speech that does something. It's always active. Okay. And we'll get into this a little bit. There are so many action verbs in Hebrew culture that it's a very heavy action word culture. And everything is action oriented. Every word has a function. Okay. And it has a function in reality, right? And it affects reality. This is how they thought. So Isaiah 55:11 famously captures this dynamic, for it states that the word goes forth. Now, this is all personified. Now the presupposition would be, if I'm coming at it from a seminary in the West, that, oh, this is just poetry being written. But they didn't think in terms of poetry. They thought in terms of patterns. They thought in terms of function. It's an agrarian culture, so everything has some kind of function or living, so to speak. So it said it states the word that goes forth from Yahuwah's mouth does not return empty, but accomplishes his desire and succeeds in the task for which it is sent. That verb imagery is 100% kinetic. It's functioning, immediate, affecting reality. It doesn't just describe reality, it actually transects it and goes into it and starts to function in it. Okay? So it's almost like, if you think about computers, like you can write a code and it doesn't just come up on the screen itself. It actually goes into the program itself and begins to affect the program. Okay. So it's very kinetic. The word goes out. Now look at how much it's personified. The word goes out, performs work, and returns having achieved its assignment. In this sense, one can legitimately speak of covenantal physics, right? So, before I went into medicine, my major was chemical engineering. And so if you know anything about people like engineering minds, we're always thinking about mechanics, right? How does this work? Physics, right? So what we're talking about is how the covenant actually relates to your lived reality, right? Covenantal mechanics or physics. Divine speech launches realities, not merely descriptions. Jeff A. Brenner and other interpreters of ancient Hebrew emphasize that Hebrew thought is concrete, action-oriented. Words are not abstract mental labels. They are bound to actions and outcomes, blessing and curse, right? This is why it was so important that on the deathbed, the father to bless his children, because these things were attached to them. To speak a Dabar is to set a process in motion. In that light, the 10 Dabarim are 10 foundational speech acts by which the covenant Elohim establishes the shape of Israel's life. They are not mere prohibitions. They are generative structures. What you sow, you will reap. That's a law of sowing and reaping. There's a law, a principle put into it, right? Like Newton's law, something you throw up, it must come down, right? Or something that is very heavy must fall. A certain matter, right? Matter, in some sense, will fall to the ground, because it weighs more than the air it's on, right? So there's a law built in. Sowing and reaping is a principle found all throughout Scripture and in agrarian cultures. In agriculture, what you plant, you will end up yielding or reaping. Okay. Continuing on here, it says here, This perspective already begins to reframe the question of transformation. If the 10 words are speech acts that launch covenant processes, then keeping them cannot be reduced, right? We're going to deal with this reductionist idea because this is what the West does. It tries to reduce the 10 commandments or lessen what they actually are, or the 10 words, what they actually are and what they actually do, lessen their function. Then keeping them cannot be reduced to external compliance. It is participation in a living speech structure, one that, according to Deuteronomy, produces specific measurable outcomes over time. So we live in a speech-based reality, right? This is part of, quantum physics, part of what they're doing at CERN, right or wrong. The idea is that the whole world is based on particles, electrons, neutrons, photons, and protons, right? So the whole reality is built on this, and they're connected by waves, right? So you live in a reality based completely on vibration and sound. Okay, this is just the physics side of it. They've already proven that. Okay, I don't, in Dr. Emoto's, and you can look him up. Dr. Emoto did an experiment about sound, and you can probably find him on YouTube. But he did an experiment. This is just something ancillary, where he took rice and water and labeled it 3 different things. He said he's going to speak good to this rice. He's going to speak bad to this rice. He's going to, and be indifferent to this rice. And he spent like a month talking directly at the rice bowls that he set up. And the rice bowl that he continually stated, "Oh, you're beautiful, you're kind, you're loving, you're just." And he continued to speak that to the rice. Now, this is man not in covenant. I don't know what he believes, but I'm interested to find out whether or not he's a believer or not. But I don't know what he believes. But this is his experiment, and he writes on this. And he said that to one jar. To the next jar, he said, "You're dumb, you're ugly, you're hateful, I hate you." He said all these negative things to the next jar. And then to the jar to the third jar, he just was indifferent, didn't even pay it any attention, gave it no love, no words, no anything. After a month, I think it was a month to 3 months after he came back to assess. Do you know that the rice he spoke love to and kind, righteous words, good report words, fermented sweet liquor? The wine, the rice and the water that he spoke hatred towards, completely rotted and molded over. And the rice he was indifferent to, completely blackened and became as mush and just dead. So these are things to just, even in just from a scientific view, they've always known that words affect matter in some kind of way. That's it's a known physical principle. So that's just showing you a little aspect of what's going on here when we speak the righteous covenant into our households and our life. So this perspective already begins to reframe the question. We said if the 10 words are speech acts that launch covenant processes, then keeping them cannot be reduced to external compliance. It is participating in a living speech structure. That's what this creation is, living speech structure that came from the Most High, who spoke it into reality. One that, according to Deuteronomy, produces specific, measurable outcomes over time. Okay, so we have to keep attention to these things. In the little box here, I just want to pull this out. It says, remember this, that the meaning of Dabar as word, matter, case, event, or legal action, the central point to remember here is that biblical speech is not inert information, right? It has function, it has power to it. It is act-bearing, constitutive, and event shaping. Western colonial contrast, keep this in mind, words are often treated mainly as descriptions or abstract propositions detached from action. That's a major difference between Hebrew culture and our Western culture we live in. Okay, for the reconstruction, this is what we're going to do with this paper. A word can legislate, we'll show you that, constitute, and set covenant realities in motion. What's a covenant reality? You speak a word over your sick child, and the child is healed spontaneously. That's a covenantal reality. Okay. Divine speech acts create, and covenant speech participates in that order. Okay, Brother Ryan, you just took on a new Ashaya. When you spoke over her, the blessing of your covering, that created a permanent bond. That's what that did. Those words stuck. Okay. And so, and we'll look at the academic witnesses to this, okay, as well. So part 3, we're going to go on to Torah as covenant privileges. So we need to defend this, right? We need to have witnesses for this. Deuteronomy 6, 28 and 30 are central to a covenant privilege reading of Torah. Deuteronomy 6 does not introduce statutes and judgments as arbitrary tests. It consistently frames them as gifts for our good always, and that he might preserve us alive. So these are good things. These are not laborious things. This is not a yoke that drags me down. This is something that keeps me living, protects. Hearing, loving, teaching, binding on the hands and between the eyes, and inscribing on the doorposts and gates are all portrayed as privileges of a people whom Yahuwah has chosen for himself. Now, remember, this is a speech-built reality. And so he's giving you these words that you are to say, that you are to do. You are supposed to water your reality or water your family, your household with these things, and they grow into you. They protect you. They strengthen you. They revive you. They restore you. Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 14, often quoted in isolation, is best read as legal covenant outcome language. The blessing that comes upon you and overtake you. Overtake you. Remember that. Overtake you. It comes upon you and it overtakes you. It overgrows you, right? This is like when you let your bushes grow too high, right? Because this is a agrarian culture, right? This is a culture that is in agriculture. So if you have overgrowth, this is what this does. It's overgrowth. You'll see this in your life. Not that you won't have problems. We'll get into that. But the overall storyline, it overtakes you. Okay, and continuing on with this, and it says here, if you obey the voice of Yahuwah, it says, it overtakes you. If you obey the voice of Yahuwah, are not random. They are the natural juridical outcomes of living within the covenant structure itself, right? What is that structure? Deuteronomy 6, right? We'll look at that. City and field, 2 places. It says you'll be blessed in the city and you'll be blessed in the field. Womb and livestock, basket and kneading bowl, enemies and reputation among the nations, right? You have this dual connection with these different things. Are all domains in which covenant proximity is expected to yield a certain kind of fruit. Deuteronomy 30, 11 through 14. Then addresses the question of accessibility. Well, how do I get in this structure is the question. Okay, so you're saying that the Lord has this, Yahuwah has this type of ecosystem set up. It's this type of Eden, this garden. Well, how do I access it? Is the next question. Well, we are in a voice reality. We're in a sound-based creation. He spoke and it was. Well, how then do I get into his covenant is the question, right? Deuteronomy 30, 11 through 14, then addresses the question of accessibility. The commandment is not portrayed as too hard. What? Everything in Christianity taught me. Everything in my, taught me growing up, everything from the colleges I went to and things of that, it taught me, it's hard, you can't keep it. Why? It's too hard. But Deuteronomy 30 tends to say something different. Well, no one pointed that out. Well, what does it say? The commandment is not portrayed as too hard or too far away. And so that's a double problem here. Not only is it not too hard, but it's not too far away. So then it's very close to me too. Well, in ancient culture, I could say like, hey man, this thing is over here on Mount Sinai and I live all the way in Bethlehem. It's going to be tough for me to travel to go get it. But here in Deuteronomy 30, it said, no, no, no. Not only is it not hard to do, but it's not too far away. Rather, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and it's in your heart so that you can do it. The order is significant: mouth, heart, then doing. The word comes near and is taken into the mouth. You recite it, confess it, teach it. Shapes the heart and then issues in embodied practice. This is the canonical shape of what I call Dabar mechanics, right? So there's a mechanic, it's how these things work like a clock. How does it work? This is how it works. The word comes near, you take it into the mouth, you recite it, you confess it, you teach it. It shapes the heart, then it issues an embodied practice. You begin to do it. You think back to when you started keeping Torah, you started keeping the Sabbath. What made you start doing it? How do you spontaneously want to keep the Sabbath? Something already got planted in you and started to grow. This is the point, okay? In this frame, Torah is not primarily restriction. It is access. The people of Yahuwah are granted the right to Sabbath rest, to feast joy, to covenant identity, to structured morality, to generational stability, and to a measurable blessing climate. Not that you won't have problems, but the text says it will overtake you. It will overgrow your circumstances. The 10 words thus function as a front door into a covenant operating system, not as an arbitrary hurdle placed in front of grace. A widely cited ethical reading of the Torah strengthens this privilege framing. Christopher J. H. Wright argues that Israel's calling in Exodus 19:4-6 as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, a set-apart nation, is inseparable from the covenant instructions that follow. Torah functions as vocational or as vocation-forming law for a priestly people, not as a disposable legal burden. It is not a yoke to be disposed of. It's a yoke that allows your strength to be used more efficiently. Why do they put yokes on animals? An animal has raw power, raw strength. But when you put a yoke on it, if you know anything about farming, it focuses the strength to make it functional and valuable and productive. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. Okay, we keep that in mind. This is what it does. Okay. Continuing, in that light, the 10 words operate as a royal charter that trains a household, okay, and a nation to embody the king's character in public life, which is precisely why the manuscript treats them as inheritance privileges for those who come under Yahuwah's name and Messiah's lordship. From a historical perspective, the Torah as privilege framing is not a modern messianic innovation, but deeply rooted in Israel's own self-understanding. Deuteronomy 4-6 already describes the statutes and judgments as Israel's. That will be your wisdom. Direct statement. And your understanding, your chakma, and your banah in the sight of the peoples. And a unique gift that provokes astonishment at the nearness of Israel's Elohim, unlike any other Elohim of the ancient time period. This system causes an external change in the people. Okay? Psalms 19, 7-11, and Psalms 119 likewise celebrate Torah as life-giving, sweeter than honey. This all sounds like benefit, something that gives you life, something that's sweeter than honey. This is not laborious. This is not something that is, I can't handle. And more desirable than gold. This is all privilege language, never as arbitrary burden, never described that way. The wisdom tradition, Shirach, goes further in texts such as Shirach 24. And we'll look over here. Wisdom speaks of taking root in Israel and is explicitly identified with Torah. Wisdom, Torah, wisdom, Torah. Get that in your mind. Wisdom, Torah, synonymous. A gracious gift from the Most High to his people. To name Torah as gift is not a stretch. It is therefore to echo the Bible's own language about itself. What happens in Western theologic circles is that we think we know better than the ancient Hebrews and ancient Israelites. And so what happens is that we will tend to try to define for them what they thought instead of letting the word that they wrote tell us what they thought. Second Temple Jewish authors reinforce this valuation. Philo can speak of Moses. This is interesting, right? Now we're starting to get these multiple witnesses from different vocations, so to speak. So Philo can speak of Moses. This is a historian now, as giving laws that are the images of the divine will. Now he is a witness into the way they thought at the time, first century Jerusalem, first century culture. He's telling you how they thought about it. This is not an assumption. He's part of the culture. He said Philo can speak of Moses as giving laws that are images of the divine will and of the Decalogue as the heads of all particular commandments, designated for the benefit or designed for the benefit of soul and city. Josephus, defending Judaism before Greco-Roman critics, portrays the Mosaic Constitution as the best laws, precisely because they come from Yahuwah and secure justice, piety, and order. Within this world, the earliest Jesus movement, the Nazarene, the Nazarene, did not regard Torah as a problem to be solved, but as an honored gift of Israel's Elohim, reread around Messiah now. Isaac W. Oliver, in his work on Torah praxis, and Matthew and Luke, for example, argues that these writings presuppose continued Jewish observance of Torah while extending the blessing to Gentile God-fearers. And this is a Jewish brother who is a Messianic Jew, who is a scholar of New Testament, and he really writes a lot on eschatology and what that looks like from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay, so really good stuff on him. African biblical hermeneutics resonate with this framing. David T. Adamo has shown that African readers instinctively treat divine instruction in Psalms of law and wisdom as gifts for flourishing. Sources of protection, speaking the Psalms over your household, healing your household through the Psalms, and community cohesion rather than legal demands. Calling toward gift and privilege reflects both the ancient Jewish and African-Semitic instinct more than modern Western anxiety about legalism. Okay, so let's look how to read here. We have our main text that we're dealing with here. Central point here to remember, just to refresh on this section, Torah is presented in the scripture as gift, wisdom, life preservation, measurable, covenant outcome. If we look here in terms of the contrast to Western culture, a law versus grace narrative, they make it immediately conflict with grace of the Most High or the mercy of the Most High. And they turn Torah into burden, impossibility, failed self-salvation. So Torah then in Western culture doesn't become the key that unlocks the covenant community in the door for you to receive the blessings of it because it's a privilege system. Instead, they make it become the thing that blocks you from privilege. Okay? And when you look at the reconstruction from a Semitic or African-Semitic viewpoint, Deuteronomy presents Torah as near, good, life-giving. It yields fruit in family, land, public standing, and communal stability. Okay? So we got to keep these in our mind. Teaching point here to kind of keep in mind. I'm going to read through this really quick. for this discussion, the key distinction is not between communities deemed real. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to show you, okay, in this note section, I wanted to break down for you exactly different communities that are Jewish communities worldwide. There are certain ones that use the Talmud as the binding principle of their community, and there are other communities that only use Torah only. So in that framing, you have what's understood as rabbinic Judaism, and that's a large majority of Judaism throughout the world, and they tend to use the Talmud as their glue for their community. However, you have communities that are known in the literature as what you might call non-rabbinic communities, that don't know or either disagree with the Talmud or use of the Talmud as the binding principle, and they will use the Tanakh and the Torah as their binding principle within their villages, within their tribes, within their culture. That is their legal code. That is their legal system. So now, how would you use this when you talk about developing your household? The important thing for you to understand, right, as being in diaspora, is to use the Torah as the glue or binding principle, not looking at it as commands to enforce, but to speak them. Why? Because they seed into your people. They seed into the foundations of your dwelling, into the ground beneath your feet, into the ground beneath your altars, your prayer altar at home. These things fill your house and they attach. Okay, this is the Hebraic viewpoint. This is the new lens we're looking through. And I'll skip down here just to kind of give you a little bit of information here, historical. We're down to the first paragraph within that box. Formal non-rabbinic and pre-rabbinic witnesses. Karaite Judaism is the clearest form of non-rabbinic Jewish movement and rejects the binding authority of the rabbinic oral and rejects the rabbinic oral Torah and the Talmud in favor of the scriptures as the governing source of doctrine and life. Traditional Beta Israel or the Haymanot also belongs to this discussion as a Torah-centered African Jewish tradition, historically distinct from mainstream rabbinic Talmudic development. Qumran and the Yahad provide an earlier pre-rabbinic witness to a community shaped by scripture, rule, liturgy, repeated prayer, and communal confession, rather than the later rabbinic systems, right, that tend to put Torah in a different compartment. Comparative African and Eastern witnesses, Yemenite Jewish groups is not really non-rabbinic. They still have that, but it remains an important here because it preserves a strong recitation. So they recite a lot of Torah in their discipline and in their learning cycles. Okay, and they recite, and their reciting of it utilizes body, oral, and their entire community. Along with that is Limba, Igbo, or Israelite communities may also, that are self-identifying in Africa, also tend to use Torah in their primary orientation of their communities. They do repetition, communal recitation, and they remain closely joined together because of that historically. And why does this matter? In Torah-centered communities, repetition is not decorative. Repeated recitation, chant, call and response, and public confession help make Torah the actual organizing memory of the household and the community. This strengthens this claim, right? That word is event, the word event culture. Repeated speech is part of how covenant identity is formed, shaped, and embodied. I can just say from growing up, one of the things that we did oftentimes within my household is that my father would have us, reading the commandment at sunset, reading all the commandments. It'd be your turn up to read the commandments. Or he would speak the Aaronic blessing on us daily, right? So we had a portion of Torah always being spoken over us as a binding principle, within the house. The words matter. And we'll see, based on neurology and neuroscience, how this actually rewrites your brain. Okay, we'll get into that a little bit later in a different session. Okay. And so let's for time's sake, let's jump on a little bit here to part 4. Transformation and new creation and internalized word. The concept of transformation is supported in the text, Ezekiel 36, 26 through 27, which describes the process as not as self-improvement, but as new creation. I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit within you. I will and he says, I will put my spirit in you and cause you to walk in my statutes, right? So this is not self-help. This is not you by your, pull up your bootstraps and just, motor through it. It's something happening that is outside of you. It happens to you, and it causes you to actually walk in his way. The verb belongs, all the verbs belong to Yahuwah. Give, put, remove, write, cause. All these action verbs are things that he is doing to you. Jeremiah 31:33 likewise promises that the Torah will be written on the heart. The new covenant is not the abolition of law, but its internalization. Psalms 51 is crucial here. When David prays, create me a clean heart, O Elohim, O Yahuwah, and renew a right spirit within me, the verb that he uses is bara. The same verb used in Genesis 1:1. For Yahuwah's creation of the heavens and the earth uses the same verb. It's a covenantal creation act that is occurring inside of your heart. Scholars like Michael Heiser have drawn attention to this restricted use of bara for divine creative acts. It's almost always associated with divine creative acts of things that he's doing to someone or to something. David is thus asking for a Genesis level act in his inner life. He wants Yahuwah to speak over his moral chaos the same way he spoke over the primordial waters at creation. Taken together, these texts suggest that transformation is fundamentally an act of divine speech, an inscription. The Most High speaks, that's an action verb, a new heart into being, and then writes, another action verb, his 10 words upon it. The human response is not to generate that change. You can't make the tree grow, but you can let the husbandman plant in you. The human response is not to generate that change, but to agree with it, to receive, to believe, to confess. In Pauline terms, this is expressed in Romans 10, where the apostle quotes Deuteronomy 30. The word is very near you. Do you remember the first agreement you had with the Most High Yah? And where you said, I agree to who you are as king and creator of the universe, of this earth, of the heavens. I agree, that's you. And I take on your covenant. Do you remember when you said it? So here we go here as we continue. It is in your mouth and in your heart. Then he explains, with the heart, the lev, right? The heart, with the heart. Hebrew lev, I believe. One believes and is justified. Well, okay. But James told me, faith without works. Yeah, faith without works. Yeah, agreed. You're right. But who told you speech was not an act or a work? Something to think about. So with the heart, one believes and is justified, made righteous, declared righteous. And with the mouth, one confesses and is saved. Believe and confess. Belief and confession are two sides of the same covenant agreement. So where do we see in scripture where this is actualized? where the argument from this event in Scripture argues that speech has to be action, or functional in its orientation. It has to do something. Couple things. You see the thief on the cross. He couldn't keep a feast day. He couldn't give to the poor. He couldn't go and pass out food to the hungry. He couldn't go read Torah to his children. But why was he justified there, or told by the Messiah himself? The walking embodied covenant, the word itself putting on flesh. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Or I tell you today, you will be with me into paradise. Well, how could that be? He couldn't do anything. He couldn't pull his bootstraps up. But what did he do? He rebuked the other thieves questioning the divinity of the Messiah. Oh, if you really are who you are, sounds like the temptations in the wilderness. If you are who you say you are, then turn this into this. Take us down with you. He rebuked them, and then he said, remember me. Well, where do we see that kind of phrasing at? Well, if we go to Psalms 25, he said, remember me, oh Yahuwah, and your mercy, because of your tender mercies, because of who you are. Remember me. So I argue that the thief on the cross used the Psalms on the Messiah. He said, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Because what he is doing is acknowledging you are the covenant embodied. You are the word of the Most High who leapt down from heaven and took on flesh. So I recognize of who you are, that you are the word of Yah embodied, that you are the walking covenant of the Most High Yah, and I accept who you are. I rebuke those who challenge you, and now I say, remember me. The first covenant confession, do you remember? Here, the ancient Semitic family logic becomes crucial. Paul insists that if we are children, then we are heirs of Yahuwah and joint heirs with Messiah. It is not a metaphor borrowed from Western individualism. It is rooted in tribal patterns in which sons inherit not only wealth, but name. So he's giving you his name. You know the name of Yahuwah. Many people don't know that. He's given that name to you. What else did he give to you when you made that first covenantal yes, that first agreement? He's giving you his law. He's giving you his customs. He's giving you land and responsibility and children and a wife or wives and people to care for. He's established his covenant in the land through you. To be an heir with Messiah is to be written into his covenant package. Forgiveness of sins is a privilege. Yes, but also the writing of Torah is a privilege on the heart by the Spirit, and the right to participate in covenantal outcomes associated with that Torah. Salvation necessarily brings the believer into the inheritance, or at minimum, gives you access to it. You have access to restoration. You have access to healing. You have access to forgiveness. And you have access to protection. To refuse these privileges, is to live as a stable hand with a prince's ring in one pocket. Okay? And so closing this session, just going through things that we need to pay attention to, new creation language here, right? And the internalization of Torah within the heart, the mouth, and the life. Central point here, transformation is not generated. It's not I'm going to upgrade myself, but it's spirit enabled inscription. Do you remember when you said yes to the Most High for the first time, to his land and his territory? This is why the fourth commandment is so powerful. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall thou labor and do all that work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy maker. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy daughter, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy cattle, nor the stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days Yahuwah made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested on the Sabbath day. Therefore Yahuwah blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. In that commandment is his territory, his status as creator, then his territory he rules over. It's a privilege. That's what this part is to show you. It is a privilege that you are being welcomed into. Privileges. You are now a son and a daughter. You are in my family. Here's your robe. Here's your ring. Here's your sandals. This is your territory. You can bind and loose. I give you authority, says the Messiah. And he didn't just give it to the 12. He gave it to 70 more. And it got so interesting when the disciples attempted to stop an unknown man who was casting out devils. What did the Messiah say? He's not against it, then he's for us. And he extended it to many, many people. Okay? All right. So central point here, transformation is not self-generating. Keep that in mind. It's not a self-generating upgrade or a generated upgrade, but spirit-enabled inscription. He writes on the heart like he wrote on the stones. He writes. Proverbs says, my voice is the pen of a ready writer. Not Proverbs, but Psalms. My voice is a pen of a ready writer. Meaning your voice. He writes with his voice the words writing on the Ruach. Right. Okay. All right. We'll continue on here. So these are our texts that we are dealing with for that box 4. We're in key scriptures here. And these are some of the academic witnesses that we just went through. And now coming to the end here, session 2, we'll deal with internalization, confession, agreement, and healing. That's very interesting. The healing part I had to do, I'm a physician. So the healing is super important to me. And we'll look at that. And you'll be amazed at how often in deliverance work, confession and renunciation are key to having physical circumstances and sicknesses absolutely reversed in real time. I'll tell you a testimony. About 5 years ago, as we end this session, 5 years ago, my Ashaya was pregnant with my first daughter. And we were so happy. I already had a son, and, he was now going to have a little sister. So we were about 8 weeks, probably about 8 to 10 weeks pregnant, something like that. And had a good pregnancy so far. We were so excited. My Ashaya was a little bit later in age, and it was just an absolute blessing and miracle that she was able to get pregnant. The Most High had blessed us in such a way. And one of the things we did before she got pregnant was I made an oath to the Most High. I had her in the room. We were together in prayer, and I oathed to the Most High. I said, if you give me children, then I will make sure to raise them in your covenant, and I'll give them back to you in righteousness all the days of their life. And he blessed her in her latter years. So, of course, whenever you do something powerful and you use your words in that kind of way and you oath something to the Most High, the devil wants to come and test, and he's going to test. And so about 8 to 10 weeks in, she ended up one day, I'm at work, and she had just really started to bleed just profusely. And boy, we thought we were getting ready to have a miscarriage. And, she called me. I'm at the hospital. She's, crying on the phone. I run home from the hospital. She says, what, I'm going to do, because she was bleeding so much. We thought, by the time she, tried to get in the car or something like that, I said, just lay down, because we didn't have time to try and seek the help of the powers that be, of modern medicine or anything like that. We didn't have time for that. So I said, just sit on the bed. We started praying, Lord Most High, I dedicated these things to you. Got to get home. So I get home. She's sobbing. We're both tearful, man. We're both tearful. We're feeling crushed. And the circumstances look really dim. If I equate the circumstances to those lying vanities or to the fiery darts that the Apostle Paul talks about, or the lying vanities that Jonah describes, those things that happen to you in life that appear one way. And maybe if you pay a lot of attention to them, you may change your utterance. You may not agree with the covenant anymore, and you may say, I'm lost. That's over with. But I didn't say that. I told her, lay on the bed and take your stomach out, and I'll just pray over your stomach. And so I lay my hands on the stomach. I said, usually at this time, it was like, 5 years, I've always used Yahweh or Yahuwah, some kind, or Jesus. I didn't have an issue with using either one, or brothers and sisters who did. But I said, today, I'm going to use your Hebrew name. And I'm going to use it in power. And so as my Shai laid there, I laid my hands on her stomach, and I got down close to her stomach. Said, this can't happen. And so I said, into the stomach, in the name of Yahuwah Yahushua, I forbid death. And then I walked out, and that was the first time I used the full name like that, directional, functional. And I walked out, saddened. And maybe 2 minutes later, she came in and said, I can't feel any more bleeding. And 9.5 months later, our daughter was born. The power is real, my friend. And when you take hold of his covenant, you don't take hold just in action, but you speak it, because speech is action. And speak his word, and you will reap what you sow. So may the Most High bless you and keep you. May the Most High make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Most High lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Thank you so much. Shalom, shalom.